Mr. Kubas, are you ready today? Are you ready, Mr. Kubas? Okay. We'll call this meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission to order. The agenda that was originally printed has been revised. Item 5, special use permit application, they've chose not to do that today, so item 5 will not be on the regular agenda. The first order of business, we have minutes from 3 meetings that have been published for February 20th, September 18th, and October 16th, all of 2013. At this time, I'd ask if anyone has any comments, corrections, or additions to those minutes, and I would ask that we get a motion to approve all of those if not being anything to correct. Mr. Kovash.
Motion to approve.
Been a motion to approve. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
A second by Mr. Grimm. Any discussion? If being none, all those in favor of the motion to approve signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Minutes approved. The first order of business on the regular agenda is a preliminary plat. It's to consider a preliminary plat for the Gaffney addition. The site is generally located in the southwest quarter of the northwest quarter of Section 10, Township 139 North, Range 96 West. The site is approximately 1.76 acres. And at this time, I'd ask the party presenting, please come forward, and we'll hear your what you have planned on that property.
Good morning. My name is Pat Gaffney, and I'm representing my husband's estate, and we own the land that you mentioned. And at this time, this land was not plotted before, and we want to split the property into two separate lots, and that's basically the information that I have.
Thank you, Mrs. Gaffney.
And KLJ has already done the surveying and provided the information here.
Okay.
Thank you, Earl.
Anybody have any comments at this time or questions? Is there anyone in the public who would like to make comment on this preliminary plat? And I'd ask for a recommendation from the city.
Mr. Chairman, good morning. Steve Josephson, City County Planner. The recommendation is to approve the preliminary plat. Just wanted to highlight a couple of things here, and these I have communicated this to Mrs. Gaffney. There's the commercial concern that's on the western portion of it, and then the single-family residence, which is on the eastern portion of it. Because the zoning on there is community commercial, it would make that residential structure would be a non-conforming structure. So should it be destroyed, it couldn't be built back and used that way. And we've discussed the potential for rezoning that property. And when I spoke to recently, they are going to wait on that and probably wait until whoever buys the property to go ahead and rezone the to make the decision as to whether or not they wish to rezone to a residential zoning district. But I did want to go on the record and state that. Otherwise, recommendation is for approval. There's a couple of conditions. MDU had just asked that their gas lines be shown on the final plat, and then we had a comment from engineering that the applicant meet with staff of engineering to determine the necessity of a construction easement for future capital improvement projects. So it's not a requirement to do one. It's just to meet with engineering staff to see if one was actually needed. There's going to be sewer line going through that area. And I'm here to answer any questions.
Any questions at this time for Mr. Josephson? Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
This time I'll close the public portion of this hearing and I ask for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move the City of Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission recommend approval of the preliminary subdivision plat for the Gaffney Addition subdivision, subject to the conditions listed.
Thank you, Mr. Elkin. Is there a second?
A second.
Second by Mr. Tews. Any discussion? Being none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, Ms. Gaffney. Item 2 on the regular agenda is a preliminary plat. It's to consider a preliminary plat for the replat of the S&B subdivision. The site is generally located in the northeast quarter of Section 32, Township 140 North, Range 96 West. The site is approximately 19.99 acres. This time I'd ask the party presenting, please feel free to come forward.
Good morning. My name is Will Ralph. I'm with Braxton Development, 1735 South 19th Avenue, Suite B, Bozeman, Montana. We are one of the partners on the Sierra Commons Apartments at this location, and we have been working with the city on abandoning a portion of the right-of-way in this area. I'll just give you a brief background of our thoughts associated with this abandonment. Originally, the Sierra Commons Road was planned to go through from State Avenue over to 21st as a connection around the commercial corner of that property. As we got into the development of the property, when we started looking at site grading as well as grades on 21st, it became apparent that there was some site distance issues coming from the west, and with the grades of those two streets, there was a potential for accidents at that location. We also had some concerns about Sierra Commons Road with its local street nature being used as a pass-through road to get through that intersection of 21st and State as it becomes more busy. So we've been working with Mr. Corton and the engineering department to abandon the access onto 21st Street, which also should ultimately help the total access of State Avenue and 21st by eliminating an access point where there could be queuing lengths at that intersection. So we've proposed the plat here to abandon Sierra Commons Road essentially at the intersection to the apartments. We do have some public utilities in that right of way, so that's how we established that location, and we've been working with the private utilities, gas, electric, and those here locally to abandon the easements in this location as well. Although there's no infrastructure in there, we are working with them to do that. So that's a little bit of background. I'd be happy to answer any questions anybody might have about the plat.
Any questions at this time for Mr. Ralph?
Thank you.
Thank you. So I might ask if there's anyone from the public who'd like to make a comment on this preliminary plat. This road abandonment, feel free to come forward. Your recommendation from the city? Mr. Corton?
Mr. President, Commissioners, the city staff recommends approval. We've had discussions, as Mr. Ralph has talked about, over the last year with respect to the property. The fire department and city engineering is in concurrence with that, so we're in favor of the replat as it stands today.
Thank you. Anyone else have any comments or questions? Being none, we'll close the public portion of this hearing, and I would ask for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the approval of the replat of S&B subdivision as depicted in Exhibit A as meeting the requirements of the Dickinson Municipal Code.
Thank you, Mr. Grimm. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Kovash. Any further discussion? Being none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you very much, Mr. Ralph. Item 3 on the regular agenda is a preliminary plat. To consider a preliminary plat for the Porter Johnson subdivision. The site is generally located in the southwest quarter of Section 33, Township 140 North, Range 96 West. The site is approximately 1.25 acres. And Mr. Grimm is excusing himself from discussion on this. He had a part in drawing up this. This time I'd ask the party presenting, please feel free to come forward.
Tom Grimm with Dow HCAM. What we're proposing is a preliminary plat for just a simple subdivision of Dan Porter's, his current residence along Empire includes 2 tracts of land. The back tract, we're proposing to subdivide into 2 lots. The back tract, which terminates at the end of 11th Street West, is proposed for a residential lot by Dennis Johnson. The preliminary plat includes a 20-foot right-of-way for easement and utilities to service Lot 2 of the subdivision. And the applicant's aware of the need for a fire hydrant at the termination of 11th Street West. Any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Grimm?
Mr. Chairman, I have a couple questions. Tom, what's that east-west strip? On the drawing, it's labeled, it's an unplatted remainder.
Yeah, Mr. Dick Cordy still maintains that strip of property. It's about a 6-foot wide strip of land that right now it's not included as part of this property. It's independently owned by Dick Cordy.
Okay, so Mr. Porter doesn't own that.
No, he still owns that strip of land. The owner to the north of this property, I think it's Sunrise Drive subdivision, the south lot, is in the process of purchasing that strip.
Okay, okay. And then what about water and sewer? You know, I'm trying to understand what's on the drawing here.
At the north east corner of the property is a 30 by 40 foot easement that currently serves that Sunrise or Suncrest, the subdivision to the north. That easement connects to the utilities. The utilities would be served from that existing easement. So there's sewer and water right in that easement.
They're all contained within that existing easement?
Yes.
Okay, okay. That's the only question I have.
Any other questions for Mr. Grimm?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. This time I'd ask if there's anyone from the public who would like to make comment on this preliminary plat. Please feel free to come to the podium, state your name and address, and I'm glad to hear your comments. Anyone else from the commission wish to make comment? This time I'd ask what the recommendation from the city would be, Mr. Corton? Or Mr. Josephson? Thank you, Mr. Josephson.
Thank you, Steve Josephson. Steve Josephson, City County Planner. Staff recommends approval of the preliminary plat. The preliminary plat. The proposed size of the two lots is very similar to the existing lots that are in the area, and as the applicant's representative stated, they're aware of the comment from the fire department about the need for a fire hydrant in that area, and that's a condition that prior to the final plat that they find out what those requirements are and meet them. Otherwise, I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Josephson. Anyone have any questions at this time? Any comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This time I'll close the public portion of this hearing, and I would ask for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move the City of Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission recommend approval of the preliminary subdivision plat for the Porter Johnson subdivision, subject to the condition proposed above as depicted in the application materials, meeting all the requirements of the Dickinson Municipal Code, also being in the interest of public health, safety, and welfare.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second that.
Second by Mr. Elkin. Thank you. Any discussion? Further discussion? Being none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, Mr. Grimm. Item 4 on the regular agenda is a final plat. It's to consider a final plat for the Ben Lance subdivision. The site is generally located in the northwest quarter of Section 14, Township 139 North, Range 96 West. The site is approximately 5 acres. At this time, I'd ask the party presenting, please feel free to come forward.
Good morning, Commissioners. Steve Rude with Advanced Engineering here. On behalf of Ben Lance, this being the final plat, you've had the opportunity to review the preliminary. We've had to modify the lots just a little bit to make sure we hit the setback requirements, front yard setbacks. As presented on the preliminary, it was a little too close to a couple of sheds, but we've remedied that with this final plat. And I think I'm here just to answer any questions you might have.
Do you deal with any of the situations about anything that is on the property now, or just strictly with the engineering of the proposal of where you're going to place the home?
I have nothing to do with placing the home. That will come at the building permit stage, I believe.
Okay. But for the setbacks?
For the setback,
you help determine that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
But you have nothing to do with anything about any of the other items or buildings or vehicles on the property,
No.
right?
I have nothing to do with that.
Okay. Anyone else have any other questions or comments at this time for Mr. Rude?
I'll make one comment. I just want to thank Mr. Rude. I don't know if you all caught it, but there's an easement that needs to access this lot, and this is really done the way it's supposed to be done. The easement's been filed, it looks like, it's been recorded.
They've tried, but since this parcel doesn't exist, they won't record it, but it's been created. The document exists
Okay.
and has been executed
And it's
by...
very clear who that easement benefits, and it's a fine point, I guess, in the technical aspects of the plat, but it's being done right, and that's good. So
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Any other comments or questions for Mr. Rude? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Somebody ask if there's anyone else in the public who would like to make comment on this final plat. Please feel free to come forward. Glad to hear your comments. Anyone else from the commission wish to make comment? Anyone from the city wish to make comment this time?
Steve Josephson, City County Planner. Staff recommends approval of the final plat, and we had worked with the applicant's representative to make an adjustment to those boundaries so that the existing buildings would not fall within the required setbacks of the agricultural zoning district, and also worked with them to make sure that they had the instrument that would record the easement to and from the property. There were some conditions that were associated with this. The applicant has met the conditions. We've had the discussion with them as to what kind of structure, what kind of structure can go on the property, and about any other uses on the property. I've been assured by the applicant's representative that any of the vehicles there are ones that are being used for agricultural purposes, for parts and so on, that there's no commercial or other activities going on the property, and they've been told about what are appropriate uses for that property, which ones are appropriate and which ones aren't. So based upon that, staff recommends, and the information in front of you, staff recommends approval of the final plat.
Thank you, Mr. Josephson. Any questions for Mr. Josephson at this time? Comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This time we'll close the public portion of this hearing, and I'd ask for a motion.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Elgin?
I move the City of Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission recommend approval of the final subdivision plat for the Ben Lance subdivision as depicted in the application materials, as meeting all the requirements of the Dickinson Municipal Code and also being in the best interest of the public health, safety, and welfare.
Is there a second to that motion?
I second.
Second by Mr. Tews. Any discussion? Being none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you very much. As stated earlier, item 5 has been withdrawn. We'll go to item 6 on the regular agenda. It's a zoning text amendment. It's to amend Chapter 34, subdivision of land, to include new provisions for definitions, procedures, and design standards. This time I'd ask the presenter, please feel free to have liberty. Mr. Corton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can tell that you're confident on which one is going to present. So, with that, as you recall, back in September 2002, we adopted new subdivision regulations. As part of that, we recognized that we would amend it periodically from time to time based upon changes to conditions or just will of the commission or the public. Since implementing it and administering it over the last year, I've put forth different areas that I think need clarification. And I'd like to walk through those today and hopefully get your concurrence to move forward for adopting this amendment to the ordinance. If you go past the staff reports and go to page 6, as part of your application materials, the very top is the definition of subdivision. I would like to amend the definition to include additional language to address local jurisdictions. That would be city, counties, public utilities, and telecommunications. The language that I proposed is as follows: federal, state, and local jurisdictions, public utilities, and telecommunications are exempt from this chapter, but are required to dedicate rights-of-way along abutting roads if determined necessary by the appropriate jurisdiction. The reason for this is that, as you're keenly aware, over the next year and a half, the city is going to be embarking on a significant capital improvement plan. We're going to be acquiring lift stations, booster stations, stormwater facilities, storage facilities, and under our current code, in order for us to own that land, we'd have to go through the subdivision regulations and also meet the minimum lot size standard. We're talking about facilities that benefit the entire public that only need to be 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 square feet. And everywhere I have been, you normally exempt out when you're talking about essential public facilities from those requirements because they're unmanned. So I would hope that you would support that in order for us to just go through a quick and easy title and to exempt out that. Cell tower sites, we've had conversations with Verizon where they needed to purchase the land, and then depending on where they were at, they would have to purchase 5 acres. They're only going to use 10,000 square feet of it, and then you deal with an ongoing maintenance issue because how are they going to maintain the 5 acres? So this makes sense because this is a broad, these are services that benefit us all. The only question on this, and this was brought up by Commissioner Jackson, would be the way that I've described it, this would exempt out administrative offices and general offices. An example would be like our public works or public safety building. As this is written, this would exempt them out. I'm fine if we want to put an exclusion to say that general offices and administrative offices are not included in this definition, so that big facilities that the public has to come to they would have to go through the plating requirements. So there's two ways of looking at it. You could adopt it as is, and that would include if the city had to build a new city hall or a public safety building that we're proposing up on State Avenue, they would be exempt from our subdivision regulations. Even though we go through all that as part of the title transfer and the rest, or we could specifically say that those larger facilities that include general offices and the public has to attend would be required to go through that process, just like anybody else. So with that, I'd like to open that up for discussion and see where you'd like to go.
Comments?
Well, my name was mentioned, I guess.
Yes.
I think that the changes being proposed are fine. I think they make a lot of sense. I do have the one concern that Mr. Catan brought up. I think when we've got a little tract for a lift station or something, I can't think of a situation where we should need to bring that through the plating process. I think it's fine. But when I think about what we're doing right now with our public safety center, I can think of all kinds of reasons that should come through the plating process. So it sounds like you're in agreement with that, and you know, we can just go forward and work out the wording between now and when it goes to City Commission.
Absolutely.
That'd be the only concern I have. I think there are a lot of good reasons to still make the city or utility go through the plating process on some of these more significant tracks. So that would be.
Okay. If that's a concurrence from the commission, then I will go ahead and just put that exclusion to that and just define it as administrative offices and general offices. And that's, you know, if MDU builds a new headquarters, then obviously they go through that. But if MDU is building a substation, it would be exempt from this provision. So, and that only makes sense to do it that way. The next one below that is the definition of minor plats. We've had several minor plats over the last year, and Mr. Root is in the audience, where I think he's done 2 of them, in which they're one lot meets and bounds description. Since it wasn't platted prior to it, you had to go through the entire process for a one lot subdivision. And I believe and I just discussed this, and I didn't let Attorney Colling have a chance to research it. I believe the Century Code would require us to go through City Commission if it hasn't been platted. If it has not, then I would like to remove the provision that says that if it's part of a platted, that if it's not part of a previously platted lot, that we could do it as a meets and bounds description. So I would like to have that leverage or latitude. If there is not a specific requirement in the Century Code that states that you have to go through City Commission on a meets and bounds description parcel, and it hasn't been platted to that I'd like to get rid of that and then include language that if it's 4 lots or less, then it's considered a minor subdivision. So if you come in with 20 acres and you have 5-acre minimums, you're not putting any new roads, they already have existing roads on the periphery of that, and it's 4 lots, which that would be, then you can go through a minor subdivision, go to the Planning Commission, and then get it recorded, and not have to go through the City Commission. However, I have a feeling that probably the Century Code specifies that for a formal plat, the first of an original plat, that it has to go through that. But if it doesn't, I'd like to remove the provision about the platted subdivision and then specify that it's 4 lots or less. And see if you're in agreement with that. Okay?
Any further discussion, any comments? I think it's something good to go for if they allow it.
We haven't had too many problems with, you know, a couple 4 or less subdivisions. We would take care of that as part of our normal deliberations. I would be working with them. So, you know, if the Century Code does not prohibit that, then I would like to move forward with it 4 lots or less. Everywhere I've been, we've had major minor subdivisions, and minor were 5 or less. Some of them have 10 or less. It kind of makes sense to go through an expedited process.
So the 4 lots would be added text?
Yes,
The 4
yes.
lots are-
Yeah, I didn't have that down here. I just noticed that I didn't put that provision in here. Otherwise, if I get rid of the platted provision, then you could have as many lots, and we would have completely put a gaping hole in our subdivision regulations. Okay. The next item is are just some very, very minor changes. Lot line adjustment. We've had some confusion on that. When I adopted this, the language that they had beforehand was no more than one zoning classification. You know, the zoning classification doesn't necessarily impact a lot line. We have several bigger parcels where you have 2 or 3 zoning districts on it. The key for me would be when they come into the building permit to understand that this is commercial side of it and this is residential. So I don't see that we necessarily need that to prohibit a lot line adjustment. That makes sense. On the next page, lot combinations, the same provision of removing the no more than one zoning classification will be waived. Under lot splits, instead of 3, I've had to make a zoning determination and I've had several discussions with surveyors and developers on how that lot split is interpreted. I think this is the clearest way to do it. The way that I've interpreted it is that the existing code states that you can't have any more than 3. I've interpreted that for the entire subdivision. Then you have to come back through the planning process. This would just make it clearer that every lot within that subdivision would be allowed to be split if it could be further split, as long as you're not adding in a road. I think that makes sense. If you're splitting it more than that, you have to go through a replat. And I think that's clear language. There is a provision in here that states the new utility easements. I think that's good for major ones, but normally when you split a lot, even if you're allowed, you're going to have to put another utility easement in there to be able to get utilities. So that had kind of kicked out a lot of our lot splits. So I put a provision in here that unless the city engineer or public work director waives this requirement. If it's a minor utility easement, I don't see why that should impact anything, and you have to go through the platting process. So that's the reason that I put that language in there. Any questions with respect to that?
Just
Sue.
looking at that BK subdivision that we just looked at today, if he has 5 10-acre lots, he could split each one of those 3 times.
Twice in this language. The old way of doing it would be the whole subdivision. You could have split them, but you could only have done it 3 times. That's the way I interpreted the code. This would allow it so that each of the lots, if they're big lots and you're not including any new roads or major utilities, you could just split it down the middle. And this happens this is a standard thing that happens in our R2 when you have a duplex. They come in, it's one lot, and then they split it down the middle later on, right down the 2-hour firewall. This just takes care of that. That makes it real easy. So. Any other questions with respect to that? I think this clarifies that issue. It makes it a little bit easier for everybody to understand. Continuing on to page 10, under E. We haven't had this happen here, but we've had it happen in the county. Normally when I have had subdivision regulations, that if you get a denial, you have to wait 6 months. This prohibits, or this would make it so that an applicant doesn't just keep coming back and try to, I'm not going to change it, I don't agree with it, so I'm going to come back next month or 2 months from now and reapply and try to wear you down. In essence, this one here, unless they do a significant change to the plat, they would have to wait 6 months. Mr. Elkin, you know that they've had for the county, several applicants that have come through and just keep coming back after month after month after month. This would remove that, and this would make your original decision stand and be more warranted. So I don't know if they'll ever really apply, but if it does, it just makes it so that your decision is one that stands instead of having to keep coming back and back again. So I don't know if you have any questions with respect to that.
Is there a provision in there for an exception to that?
There is. If you do a significant change that is determined by me, then you could come back and reapply. So in other words, let's say we were requiring them to, we denied it because we didn't have a second access. They come back and say, all right, they come back with the second access. That's a significant change to it. That's a life safety issue. They can come back and reapply.
Mr. Chairman, there's another way around it too. If they withdraw their application prior to it coming before the commission, they're welcome to come back.
Sure.
This would be after you made a formal decision.
So
Exactly.
it allows for public to do what they would like to do. I mean, it doesn't prohibit them from doing something in their lives they would like to do.
This is after a formal decision from you. I mean, if they come in front, continue it, and then ultimately withdraw it, you haven't made a decision yet. They could always come back 3 or 4 months later and reapply. That provision would not come into play.
The only question I had on this one is, what about major plats? Is that already covered on major? Your proposed change is just for minor plats. Don't we want to do it?
I have
for
that
both?
provision under major. I just didn't copy that provision
Okay.
for you.
Okay.
And then the last change I have is throughout the document, it references the city planner and just put the community development director. Other than that, engineering is looking at the design requirements, and we may come back in the next couple of months to amend some of the language or add in some specific provisions with respect to the design and the processes that we do have. But at this point, I wanted to do an amendment specifically on the definition of subdivision, because we are working on numerous CIP projects that we will need to get fee title for that, and I want to move forward with that so we don't have to purchase large amounts of lands that are unnecessary. So with that, I hope that you would recommend approval, and we can move it forward with the amended language to the City Commission.
Yet in that section on draft subdivision agreement, I know we always talk development agreement. And we talk DA all the time. Do we need to clean that up?
I'll clean that up, and we'll just put development agreement, or we'll start calling it a subdivision agreement. Because to answer that question, Commissioner Jackson, most of our smaller subdivisions, we are not going through and doing DAs for, because it's unnecessary. It's only our bigger ones that do that. So
Sure.
it just makes sense to clean that up and say we have the ability to administratively remove that.
Oh, yeah. No, I agree with that.
Mr. Colling, do you have any comments on these proposed changes at this time?
No.
Thank you. So that sounds good. Would you recommend any formal motion on this item?
Mr. President, Commissioners, if you are in agreement with the general scope of what Mr. Corton has outlined, I think a motion to that effect would be in order, and then you would recommend approval of those changes to the City Commission. We'd then go through the process of crafting the ordinance for City Commission consideration.
Thank you. This time I'd ask if someone would like to make a motion to that effect.
Well, I'll move that we recommend the proposed changes with the understanding that we're going to rework the city and utility exemption on the subdividing.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Kovacs. Is there any further discussion? Being none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you very much, Mr. Catan. You may continue on.
Mr. Chairman, the last item I have today is the proposed new overlay district. This will be called the West Villard Overlay District. As I mentioned to you several months ago, we've had problems along the Villard corridor, in which we have the first half block to a block. It's general commercial, but we have a multitude of single-family, multifamily units in there. And over the 2 years, 2.5, almost 3 years that I've been here, we've had to deal with the situation in which people have tried to sell those, and then they try to get letters from their lenders that they could rebuild in case of a fire or damage above 50%. And we really couldn't supply that letter, and that makes it difficult for these properties to rehabilitate or remodel, or to some of these to sell them. So You had gave permission for me to move forward with an ordinance just to address this particular area, and that's what I have for you today. And it's a pretty simple ordinance. It essentially will allow the existing dwelling units, residential dwelling units, as of the date of the title, as of today or whenever it's enacted, that those would be considered legally conforming uses. That would allow them all the provisions to be able to refinance and sell that in perpetuity for as long as they want to. The key on this provision is that it would only deal with the ones that are in effect today. So if anybody else wanted to build a new residence in a commercial district, they couldn't do that in this overlay. So I have the language for you. I specified the district. The boundary is from State Avenue, north and south, to 8th Street on the south side, to 8th Avenue on the south side, and 5th Avenue on the west side. And with that, I'm able to answer any questions you have.
Yeah. So why does the overlay district stop at 5th Avenue? Isn't there residents to the...
When I looked and I drove through each of the avenues, and there wasn't any existing residents. The residents that are there are converted commercial uses as we speak. So this is just impacting just the residential areas. And I may come back, at a later date of another area in the city if we have that. But I think this is the issue, that the biggest problem that I've dealt with here in this particular area, where we have older houses that have been there for 60, 80 years. Due to a housing shortage that we do have, we don't want to further impact it. And eventually we may come back with a mixed-use zone. Have residential and commercials to allow that. But we could leave this overlay district for decades to come if you prefer. So.
Thank you, Mr. Corton. Any comments? How does this, I think that I know the answer, but I'm not sure. In how many special uses do we have in this district now? Say a residential or commercial that has got a special use attached to it right now?
No. Basically, what I am doing is instead of doing a special use permit and having to go through that process, they would be considered as a legal conforming permitted use. So it'd be similar to, this overlay district would be similar to a mixed use zone where you could have residential and commercial. The key point on this is that the difference between a mixed-use zone and an overlay is that we are saying that only the existing residents, the ones that have been there, we're not talking newer ones, that these houses have been there for decades, only those houses would be allowed to fall under or be blanketed by this new overlay district. They would be allowed to refinance or sell their property and retain their home. That district is a transition district, and those houses have been there for decades, and they have worked well with the commercial uses. So we don't want to adversely impact them. This would prohibit any new ones. It would only come into play for only the existing ones, and that's all we're trying to protect at this point.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
They would be able to, if they had a fire and lost the home, they would be able to rebuild it.
Absolutely. They would just need to prove to us that it was there beforehand, and we would know that from a prior permit.
I know that this has been an issue a number of times, and we should do this.
Sure. Any other comments? I'd ask for a motion to support that.
I'd move that the City of Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission recommend approval of the amendment to Chapter 34 of the subdivision land as proposed by city staff.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Second by Mr. Elkin. Is there any further discussion? Thank you for your work, Mr. Corton. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you very much. Before we adjourn, I have one item that I think I should just mention, and that would be, and I would ask for our city planners to carry the message to the City Commission on their wishes for fulfilling board members or commission members, that issue should be addressed before we get to a number that's too low to function properly. I would ask that if anybody wants to have input in that, please talk to our city planners, and that I would ask also that no one try to load the commission with their favorites. So, we would like to add some more broad-minded people, if we could. It's a difficult, sometimes difficult task, but we've been fortunate to have the people, I think, and the support of the developers and the city commission, because we remember that we serve here at the wishes of the city commission for the public. So that's the only comment I'd have. And at this time, I'd ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Then a motion to adjourn. Is there a second? Second. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Meeting adjourned.